The thyroid hormone axis is a set of hormones, some of which you've already heard of, that ultimately regulate your body's metabolism and energy usage. We call it an axis because it's a set of hormones, like you have hormone 1, which controls hormone 2, which controls hormone 3, yada, yada, yada. And usually at the end, it's going to loop around, and 3 is going to control 1, or 4 is going to control 1, or whatever, through negative feedback. But you have basically a linear, this controls this, and so it goes straight down like an axle or an axis. So that's why it's called a hormone axis. The main gland of the thyroid hormone axis is the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland actually does several things, but the main thing that it does is it is made out of follicles, which are made out of follicular cells, and these follicular cells secrete the hormone thyroxine, which is a thyroid hormone. There's actually 2 thyroid hormones. Thyroxine is the first thyroid hormone. It's usually called T4 because it has 4 iodines. And it secretes triiodothyronine, or T3. It does both of these in response to TSH. So TSH comes in, and T4 and T3 come out in pretty much proportional ways. Now, what's the difference between T3 and T4? Well, first off, the order that they're made in. All thyroid hormone is made as T4, and then it's turned into T3. So it's made as T4 first, and then slowly it's turned into T3. T4 is very abundant. The vast majority of thyroid hormone in your body at any one time is T4. It lasts a long time. But it's not very active. Like, it actually doesn't have much of an effect on you. Usually what happens is that T4 is secreted with a little bit of T3 with it, and then that T4 is slowly turned into T3 a bit at a time over the course of a day or a month or whatever. And then T3 is what has the biological effect. It's actually going to be what regulates cells at a very basal level. It actually gets into the nucleus and then changes how the cells express genes. And it's going to have a huge effect on tissues, but it doesn't last very long. Like, T3, once it's made, it has an effect, and then it's quickly taken away. What effect does T3 have? So it increases metabolic rate. And in this case, specifically what we mean is that it increases catabolic rate. It increases the rate at which you burn sugar to make energy in the form of ATP. Not just sugar, also fats, lipids, proteins, anything. Since burning sugar to make ATP takes oxygen, it's going to increase the amount of oxygen consumption. Since some of the energy that is released when you burn food turns into waste heat Not all of it is captured in the form of ATP. Not even most of it is captured in the form of ATP. The more thyroid hormone you produce, the more your metabolic rate, the more heat you produce. So your body temperature is controlled by thyroid hormone. Appetite, right? You're going to need something to fuel that metabolism if you're going to be having a high metabolism. So thyroid hormone stimulates appetite. Growth hormone secretion. There's actually a lot of different types of growth hormones, and thyroid hormone can affect several of them. There's like your basic growth hormone, which is just growth hormone, which is controlled by thyroid hormone, but also by growth hormone releasing hormone, and then it's suppressed by somatostatin, and usually thyroid is going to suppress somatostatin, and you suppress a suppressor, and that increases the effect. But there's a whole bunch of other growth hormones as well, insulin-like growth hormones, a whole host of other ones that have specific effects on specific targets. So if you're making more energy, you should probably be using it to grow. It's also going to affect alertness. It's going to up the metabolism of the neurons in your brain, which makes you more alert. Increase your reflex speed by upping your alertness, as well as by upping the metabolism in your muscle cells, giving them more energy to respond quicker. The thyroid also contains what are called parafollicular or C or clear cells. These are involved in calcium metabolism. They're totally unrelated to the thyroid hormone axis, but we're talking about the thyroid gland, so I'm going to mention them. These cells secrete calcitonin that is going to stimulate your osteoblasts to take blood calcium and turn it into bone. So basically, here's the thyroid hormone axis. The hypothalamus up here releases thyroxine-releasing hormone, which goes directly to the anterior pituitary and causes the anterior pituitary to release thyroid-stimulating hormone, or thyroxine, that goes to your pituitary and causes your pituitary to produce mostly T4. What your thyroid releases is about 80% T4, 20% T3, but this T4 is slowly converted over the course of time by enzymes in your tissue into T3 that then has effects on the body that we just talked about. But one of the effects that it has is that it exerts negative feedback on both the anterior pituitary and on the hypothalamus, causing less release of TRH, less release of TSH, and therefore less release of thyroid hormone. That's the simplest way that the thyroid hormone axis works. But there are other things that come into it. Is like if that was the way it worked, then everyone would always have the same thyroid hormone levels, and it would just be totally controlled by internal levels. But sometimes you need to raise the amount of thyroid hormone that you release, and sometimes you need to lower it. Cold. We said that thyroid hormone regulates your body temperature. If you're cold, you need to up your body temperature. So what does cold do? Stimulates your hypothalamus to release more TRH, thus getting more thyroid hormone. Circadian rhythm. This is less true in humans than in other mammals, but it is still true in humans. Most mammals are more active in the summertime, springtime, than they are in the winter. Since we're a diurnal species, we are more active in the daytime than we are at nighttime. And so there are, you don't need as much metabolism at night as you do during the day when you're moving around and doing stuff. So at night, nighttime is going to suppress the hypothalamus. You produce less TRH, less TSH. Daytime is going to stimulate the hypothalamus. You're going to produce more TRH, more TSH, more thyroid hormone. Similarly, the The yearly cycle can have effects as well. Some acute psychoses cause an increase in the hypothalamic production of TRH, resulting in more thyroid hormone, and often this results in a temporary psychosis-associated hyperthyroidism. Severe stress will inhibit the hypothalamus from producing TRH. Corticosteroids, which are stress hormones, and dopamine can also exert a negative effect on the anterior pituitary, resulting in less thyroid-stimulating hormone production. The production of thyroid hormone, I should point out, remember that 4 is for the 4 iodines that it has. Well, iodine isn't used very often in your body, but probably the main place where it's used is in the production of thyroid hormone. If you have plenty of iodine, then your thyroid has no problem producing thyroid hormone, and it does so readily. If you have low iodine, then your thyroid hormone has a harder time producing, or your thyroid gland has a harder time producing thyroid hormone. And that means it's going to interpret that as, I need to try harder. And so it will actually grow larger to try to produce more thyroid hormone, but that isn't going to help it, because being bigger doesn't mean that you get more iodine. This is what results in goiter, or one of the things that can result in goiter, which we'll talk about more later on. The thyroid gland is separated into follicles, which are these mostly circular areas with cuboidal cells surrounding them, and then the inside is kind of a smooth purple tissue. Not actually purple, but it stains purple. These cells around the outside of the follicle, these cuboidal cells, are going to secrete pre-thyroid hormone, and they're also going to absorb iodine from the blood and then secrete iodine into the lumen of the follicle. You don't need to know all of these steps here, but what you do need to know is that the thyroid hormone, pre-thyroid hormone, is made in the follicular cells, but it matures inside the follicle into true thyroid hormone. Well, actually, that's not quite true. It matures in the follicle into the next stage of thyroid hormone, which is then taken back into the cell where the thyroid hormones are cleaved off of their matrix that helped make them, and then exported back into the blood. So as far as pathologies go, with thyroid hormone, you can have hyperthyroid or hypothyroid. You can have too much or too little. And we're going to talk about hypothyroidism is more common. We're going to talk about that first. The effects of hypothyroidism. Since the thyroid is one of the most important hormones that affects almost every cell in the body, the signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism there's a lot of them. And it affects pretty much the entire body. So, generally, fatigue, right? Low metabolism, low energy, feeling cold, because you are cold, because you're not producing as much energy. Weight gain, despite poor appetite. Like, you're not eating a lot of food that's bad for you necessarily, but you're still gaining weight. Why are you gaining weight? Because you're not burning that energy as fast because your metabolism is low. Hair loss. This is often because the growth of your hair requires a lot of protein synthesis to support it. So without a reasonably high metabolic rate, you basically make bad hair. You make hair that doesn't have enough protein in it. Your hair follicles tend to like die off because they don't have enough energy to support them. In the lungs, you can have shortness of breath, pleural effusion, water or fluid in the lungs. Your intestines, often constipation because your intestinal cells are moving less frequently. They're slower because their metabolism is slower. And that means that the food stays in the intestines for too long, too much water gets removed from it, and it gets hard. That's what results in constipation. Delayed reflexes, because your muscles don't have enough energy. Your heart, slow pulse rate, and that's because your energy levels are low, so you're not using as much oxygen, so your heart's not pumping as much. You can end up with hoarseness in your pharynx, poor hearing, and poor memory and concentration due to low levels of energy in the brain. Hyperthyroidism is less common than hypothyroidism, but not uncommon. So what comes with this? Well, increased appetite, and specifically increased appetite without weight gain. Often with weight loss. Unexplained weight loss when you're still eating plenty of food. Like you're eating plenty of food, but you just like lose weight anyways. That can be a major sign of hyperthyroidism because you're burning off that energy faster. You're burning off energy faster, and that means that you're going to have usually a higher body temperature. So a constant, slight over temp makes you feel hot, and you have increased perspiration to cool yourself down. Often an enlarged thyroid. Whenever the thyroid is stimulated, it gets bigger. If your thyroid is producing too much thyroid hormone, chances are it's being overstimulated and will then get bigger. Technical term for that is a goiter. Sometimes you can get a goiter with hypothyroidism as well, but it's also common with hyperthyroidism. Again, fine brittle hair and hair loss is symptomatic of both of them. Here it's because you're basically you rush a job, you get a lousy job. You're not spending enough time on the hair to make the hair well, and so it ends up being brittle and easily broken. So loss of libido, depending upon the person, often tremula, hand tremors, a excess of nervous energy, jitteriness, hyperactivity, hyperreflexivity, where your reflexes will be like jerky and poorly controlled, irritability, high blood sugar. So high thyroid hormone is going to cause your liver to release a lot of sugar to feed that enhanced metabolism. And in the case of the most common cause of hyperthyroidism, which we'll get into later, is bulging eyes. That's not the case in every case of hyperthyroidism, but for whatever reason in Graves' disease, which is the most common form of hyperthyroidism, it also results in basically excessive pressure of the artery behind the eye that causes your eyes to sort of poke out and look like they're buggy or bulgy, and in certain circumstances can actually cause them to pop out. Nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea, because food is moving too quickly through your intestines and not having enough water removed from it. General causes of hypo and hyperthyroidism. So hyperthyroidism can be caused by too much secretion of TRH, usually caused by a tumor. Too much secretion of TSH, again, this is hyperthyroidism. Yes. Hyperthyroidism can be caused by too much secretion of TRH, too much secretion of TSH. Either of those can be caused by a tumor. Basically, you have a growth in the number of cells that release that hormone, thus you get more hormone released, and then you get more activity of the thyroid and an excessive amount of T4 and T3 produced. With Graves' disease, what you get is, so you have receptors on your thyroid, and these receptors respond to thyroid stimulating hormone. So usually thyroid stimulating hormone is going to get here and then cause a signal on the inside. But what you end up with is it's an autoimmune disease, sort of. And you make an antibody that actually sticks to this receptor and activates it. And so this antibody in your blood is causing your thyroid, it's mimicking thyroid stimulating hormone. So even though you might not be producing a lot of thyroid stimulating hormone, in fact, you're probably not producing very much at all, your thyroid is constantly being activated by this antibody. And so it's hyperstimulated and producing a whole ton of T4. For hypothyroidism, you could again have too little release of TRH. That could be caused by a tumor, not of the cells that make TRH, but of nearby cells. And then as that tumor grows, it kind of like puts pressure on those TRH reducing cells, sort of crushing them against the edge and killing them off or impairing them. You could have a similar thing, a tumor that causes a suppression of TSH, and this would again be not the TSH secreting cells, but nearby cells that are going to put pressure on TSH secreting cells, and then your TSH levels go low. Primary hypothyroidosis, or hyperthyroidism, is caused by low iodine intake. So you have plenty of TRH, plenty of TSH. Your thyroid is trying like heck to make thyroid hormone, but you need iodine. You don't have iodine, you don't make thyroid hormone. And so it's like trying like heck to make thyroid hormone, and it can't because it doesn't have the components to make it. So you don't make any thyroid hormone, or you don't make enough. Last is what's called Hashimoto's hypothyroidosis, which is when you have, this is a true autoimmune disease, where you have antibodies that stick to the thyroid, and particularly the cells of the thyroid that make thyroid hormone. And instead of stimulating them, what they do is what antibodies always do, which is target cells for destruction. And then your body will come in and kill off parts of your thyroid. And a dead thyroid doesn't make any thyroid hormone. So in summary, the thyroid hormone secretes mostly T4, thyroxine, and T4 is turned into T3, which is the active form that has the effect of raising the metabolism of cells throughout your body. It's a very broadly based hormone. Almost every cell in your body is affected by thyroid hormone in some way. Hypothalamus pituitary thyroid axis has a cascade of releasing hormone, atropine, and then the thyroid hormone itself, and then is controlled by negative feedback as well as environmental and psychological conditions. Thyroid hormone requires iodine to make, and breakdowns and disturbances in the thyroid hormone axis can result in hyper or hypothyroidism. You should know this thyroid hormone axis backwards and forwards, what would happen if you disturb it in various points, and all of the different ways that can cause hyper and hypothyroidism. It'll be on the test.